This week's episode of our show has been sponsored by the Grim Hollow Monster Grimoire, which is just launched on Kickstarter.
Our friends at Ghostfire Games are releasing this book packed with over 400 new monsters for 5th edition.
Kelly and I love dark fantasy, and this book is offering an amazing bestiary of horrific creatures, abominations, and undead monstrosities inspired by your favorite tales of grim, dark, dreary monster tales.
Not only that, but this book is going to contain rules for how to harvest monster parts and the crazy items that you can make with those parts.
Also, the book is going to be packed with tons of great advice for dungeon masters on how to make the most of these monsters in your adventures and encounters.
You can follow the links below to join in on the Kickstarter now. And now, onto this week's episode.
Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything Dungeons & Dragons, including advice for players and guides for dungeon masters.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Welcome to part 3 of our subclass tier rankings for the Wizard in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. What a long road it has been. We have done the 8 wizard subclasses found in the player's handbook in part 1 and part 2 of this video series. Today, we are going to be looking at the War Wizard found in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, as well as the new subclasses for Chronurgy and Graviturgy that were introduced in the Explorer's Guide to Wildemount, which, though it is a critical role-based source, it is still an official Wizard of the Coast publication. We are saving the Bladesinger because it was revised in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. So when we look at the Bladesinger and the Order of the Scribes in our next part, when we look at Tasha's stuff, we'll cover the Bladesinger then.
If you look on the screen right now, you're going to see the criteria that we use to rank the subclasses. We are pitting the subclasses against each other and not those of other classes. Keep in mind that we are not taking into account the roleplay and flavor that you might bring to the table when playing these subclasses, as everybody might have a different interpretation of that. We are maybe going to look at a little bit of multi-classing, but it is not a primary or core mechanic that we are looking at for judging these subclasses.
As always, we look at far more than just combat when we are assessing the subclasses, although the ones that we are looking at today pretty much have combat exclusive or related features, although there's a few non-combat things that you can do with some of them. But we do consider how the subclasses augment the class in non-combat situations as well, such as exploration and interaction scenes too.
So with that being said, let's continue on the path of looking at these wizard subclasses. There's a lot to discuss today, so let's get rolling.
So kicking things off, we're going to look at the School of War Magic from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. This subclass kind of is a interesting hybrid between the Abjurer and the Evoker, evoking both attack and defense to kind of be that battlefield wizard. Does it live up to that idea, though? Let's see what it gets.
Starting at 2nd level, you gain 2 core abilities of this subclass, the first one being Arcane Deflection. When you are hit or fail a save, you can use your reaction to use this ability. This immediately adds +2 to your AC or +4 to your saving throw. If you do use this ability on your next turn, you cannot cast a spell. You can only cast a cantrip.
Just note that unlike other spells like Shield, Arcane Deflection only applies to that specific attack roll. It doesn't give you a buff that lasts beyond the triggering attack or failed saving throw.
Also at 2nd level, you gain Tactical Wit, and now you can add your intelligence modifier to your initiative.
At 6th level, you gain the ability Power Surge, a number of times per day equal to your intelligence modifier. When you deal damage with a spell, you can add 1/2 your wizard level to the damage that you cause to one of the creatures hit by that spell. You regain uses of this ability only on a long rest, but you get 1 charge of this power back if you end a spell with Dispel Magic or Counterspell.
At 10th level, you gain Durable Magic. As long as you are concentrating on a spell, you now gain +2 to your AC and saving throws.
Finally, at level 14, you gain the Deflecting Shroud power. When you activate your Arcane Deflection, you choose 3 creatures within range, and those creatures take force damage equal to 1/2 your wizard level when this ability is now triggered. So again, because there's no limit to the number of times you can use Arcane Deflection, you can keep triggering this power over and over and over again, but if you do, you're going to be restricted to only casting cantrips.
I think the introduction of war magic was something that a lot of people were very excited about, myself included. I think that the war mage is a really cool subclass to have. And I don't necessarily think it is a bad subclass. I do think, however, that it is outshined by a lot of the other options presented already to the wizard. It doesn't feel like as good of an evoker as the evocation wizard or as good of a defender as the abjuration wizard. However, the mix of these two things is something that is moderately appealing. The ability to use the arcane deflection as a reaction almost every turn does open up a lot of cool options. The downside being that it now limits you to what you can do on your turn. But if you're already concentrating on a spell, or if you just had a cantrip that you wanted to throw out anyway, this becomes a really important ability to have. I will say, though, that some of the abilities here that add damage actually don't add as much as it might appear on paper. They don't really add up to an adequate amount, especially at higher levels of play when these abilities come online. And although this wizard does present an option that is more defendable and slightly better at damaging, it doesn't really do anything that other wizards can't do, in my opinion. Using the right spell choices or picking another subclass to really feed in to the playstyles presented here. The War Wizard is a nice mixed bag, but I think I want to give it a B ranking because it has its uses, but you could easily be overshined by some of the better choices out there.
I think a B is exceptionally generous for this class. I think this is a C, in my opinion. As you mentioned, it's a blend, right, of defense and offense. And this is like someone tried to make a delicious chocolate and vanilla swirl ice cream, but messed up the mixer, and now we've just got a melted blob.
Yeah.
So the tastes are kind of there, but the execution really fails. Arcane Deflection competes with both shield and counterspell as a way of saving yourself. Shield will save you in far more circumstances because the +5 bonus to AC is a wider opportunity than just +2. Mm-hmm. +2 basically will only help you against an attack that either hit your AC exactly. If it hit you by higher than 2, it doesn't raise your AC high enough to actually turn that into a miss. So it's very narrow. The saving throw thing is unique, which could save your life. A +4 is also a significant bonus for a saving throw. But, you know, you're still going to be thinking, should I be counterspelling this? If you can, right? And you want to counterspell because you want to get charges back for your power surge.
Right.
Right? And then the other problem, though, is that power surge is just a miserable amount of bonus damage. Right? Yeah. And think of it like this. You get it at level 6, which is a +3 bonus to a damage roll, which is pathetic, frankly, because it's half your wizard level. At level 10, it's +5 to a damage roll, which you're getting a number of times per day equal to your intelligence modifier. Well, that is probably +5. So it's an extra 25 points of damage for the entire day, for this entire ability. Now compare that to an evoker who got +5 from their int mod to every evocation spell they cast. They're going to rack up way more damage than you are with your power surge, even if you're regaining charges of it. So it's a miserable amount of bonus damage. The durable magic, the bonus when you're concentrating on a spell is cool, fine. It's a nice little bonus. And the deflecting shroud thing is, again, it's not a lot of extra damage, but it is kind of like getting your change back for having to use it and being restricted to casting cantrips. So overall for me, I think this is a C. I don't think that anything about this is bad. I just think it's a melted ice cream cone. I'm glad that it's ice cream. I'm happy to eat a melted ice cream cone, but I'm really disappointed with how melted it is.
I can see where you're coming from, and like as a big fan of ice cream cones, when it turns into a mushy blob, it's only partially as satisfying.
Yeah.
You're still happy to be eating ice cream, but you just wish it had hung together a little bit better. So, I mean, when I look at this list of abilities, I do want to say that there's some great options here, and useful options. You will use the options presented here. But when you add them all together and look at what they compete against in terms of your spell casting and other wizard abilities, and you compare it directly to the other subclasses that you could have chosen that might have either been able to double down on your damage or double down on your defense, I still think there's value. Like, if I go to the store and I just can't decide between vanilla or chocolate, I'll take the gooey mess of mixing them both because I get both. And there is value in that. There is value in having both elements here. We've talked about this before, actually, that Dungeons & Dragons, especially 5th edition, is a game of playing into your speciality. Diversity in what a class can do, if it tries to fill multiple roles, can actually be a hindrance where it doesn't excel at any of those roles, unless you're a bard who can do whatever. But when we look at the wizard, kind of diverging into two separate roles means you are half as good as the other classes that go full steam in those roles. Again, maybe you want both, but I can see why we're giving it a C, and I can actually I think I can agree to that. I do want to say that I don't think it's a bad subclass. I don't think it's as good as other options.
I just think that you could, if you played an Evoker and took some really good defensive spells, or played an Abjurer and took some really good offensive spells, you would be doing better than the War Wizard would be, flat out.
An Evoker with shield and mage armor is going to be better at both defense and offense than the War Wizard. Mind you, a War Wizard with shield, but shield competes.
Yeah, but also, I think that we're also existing in a universe here where the Bladesinger exists, and while we're not talking about the Bladesinger today, the Bladesinger also blows the doors off the War Wizard in those capacities as well.
Yeah,
I really think that you should consider either the Abjurer, the Evoker, or the Bladesinger before you even touch the War Wizard. It's not. I'm not going to give it a D because it's not detrimentally awful. It's just that it is not as good by a very significant margin as the other options available to this class.
I can agree with that. Well, I think it's about time that we talked about the Chronurgy Wizard, which is a pretty new addition. It came in the Explorer's Guide to Wildmount and is the wizard that messes with time.
Yeah, like the War Wizard as well, right away at 2nd level, you also get to add your intelligence modifier to your initiative rolls, but you also gain the ability, twice per day with your chronal shift power, to force someone to re-roll an attack roll, saving throw, or ability check using your reaction. And they now have to accept the re-rolled result. You can use this to turn a success into a failure or a failure into a success.
At 6th level, you gain momentary stasis. As an action on your turn, you can force a creature to make a Constitution saving throw, and if they fail that saving throw, they are incapacitated and enclosed in a little force field. Their speed also becomes 0, and this is essentially like being able to cast Hold Monster on a creature without having to use a spell slot. It lasts until the end of your next turn or until the creature takes damage.
You can only use this a number of times per day equal to your intelligence modifier, however. But it doesn't require any concentration from you at all. So you can have another concentration spell in effect and use this instead of a cantrip. So at 10th level, you gain the Arcane Abeyance power. This allows you to cast one of your spells of 4th level or lower into a bead instead. The bead lasts for 1 hour or until it's destroyed or takes damage. And you can use this bead to release the spell. What's cool about this, though, is that you can give the bead to someone else, and they can cast the spell instead. The spell still uses your attack bonus and spell saving throw DC, but in all other respects, it's treated as if that creature cast the spell. So you can cast one of your favorite spells, like Polymorph or Haste, that normally requires your concentration, give this to your fighter, and have them cast it. It's kind of like being able to concentrate on 2 spells at once.
This ability feels like a limited ring of spell storing, but the fact that you don't need to acquire a magic item to use it, and you can just turn that spell into a bead, there's a lot of versatility offered here.
Yeah, it's not really giving you an extra spell slot. The point of this ability really is so that you can take one of your spells and let someone else cast it, which is the hidden strength of the ring of spell storing as well.
At 14th level, you gain Convergent Future. Anytime a target within 60 feet of you makes an attack roll, saving throw, or ability check, you can decide whether or not that roll meets the bare minimum to succeed or one less than the bare minimum to succeed. Basically meaning that you get to choose whether or not the roll succeeds or fails. You use this ability as a reaction, and there's no limit to the amount of times you can use it, but do keep in mind that when you do use this ability, you gain a level of exhaustion that cannot be removed except by taking a long rest.
The wording of this ability is a little bit strange. It says you can decide whether the number rolled is the minimum needed to succeed or one lower than that number. And Kelly and I had a little bit of a back and forth of a debate trying to figure out whether this was meant to modify the raw die and then mods were added afterwards, or whether mods are the dice roll mods are factored into that. And my response to that was pretty simple, that, you know, if you need to make a DC 15 ability check and you have a +3 bonus, then the die roll that you need to succeed is 12. So not 15. So this ability should modify that inclusive of your modifiers. In which case, yes, you're basically deciding, does the roll succeed or fail? Someone might rule differently, and then that alternate ruling basically means you now have to metagame the whole thing, and that just gets really ugly in my opinion.
Yeah, and that was the hard part, is there is a way to interpret the wording here that basically says that if you select 1 minus the minimum roll needed, if they have any modifiers whatsoever, it means they still succeed. So then you need to know exactly what they have a negative modifier on so that you can target that, and the ability becomes much clunkier. There were several sources that we looked at online that actually said that this was not the case and that it takes the modifiers into account, and you basically do get to decide, is it a success or failure?
It is poorly worded though, but we think that it is kind of non-functional if it's worded in that way that mods aren't factored in at first. It feels really clunky and metagamey if that's not the case. In any case, this is a stupidly powerful ability that is, in many cases, better than Portent from the Divination Wizard. And that, combined with the other features of this class, this might be the #1 Wizard subclass. I think this beats the pants off the Divination Wizard.
Wow. I never thought I'd hear Monty say that.
It's way more reliable than Portent.
That's true. And I do think that, like the Divination Wizard, who is playing with fate, this one's playing with time, but you're in a game where dice rolls and outcomes are determined by timing in a theoretical sense within the game. So controlling time is a similar thing to controlling fate, and you are taking control of the outcome of the randomness of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. And the chronal shift is kind of Portent light, because you can cause someone to re-roll a successful save. And in that respect, you know, thinking back about what my kind of personal issues with how difficult it can be to use Portent, it's way easier to be like, the DM's like, oh, the monster succeeded their saving throw, roll again. Right? That's way easier to use than having to, like, figure out, should I use Portent in this case?
I do want to say with the last ability, it does cause exhaustion, and we have talked about abilities that cause exhaustion in the past in a bit of a negative light. And I will say that there is a distinct difference between an early ability that you get that you want to use every single turn that causes exhaustion, whereas at 14th level, having an ability that you're probably not going to use every turn, but that in the right situation can actually be game-changing. It can end an encounter. If you have a spell that you need to land and you can just choose how the outcome of that's going to go at the cost of a level of exhaustion, it is worth it.
It totally is. Like, to just be able to poke someone with plane shift and say, bye-bye, you're off to the elemental plane of fire, you just ended the combat encounter right there, right? And the fact that you can use this on things that aren't combat as well, for your own saving throws, for whatever you need, is just gravy on top. You're going to use it to plane shift someone to the elemental plane of fire, though.
So I think without a doubt, we're giving this an S tier.
Yeah, and we just waxed rhapsodically about the fact that it has Portent, but we totally understated the Ring of Spell Storing sort of feature, and being able to give one of your juicy concentration spells to the fighter or another party member, or if you really want to get cheesy, give it to your familiar.
This is the thing that everybody was looking for, to concentrate on 2 spells at once. Yeah. You're divvying it up, but if you're the only spellcaster in the party, you can hand a concentration spell to any other member.
Yeah.
It's great.
It's great. It's worth mentioning as well that both the Chronurgy and Graviturgy wizards have all these Dunamancy spells, which we haven't really factored these into the ranking of the classes because, first of all, these spells are gangbusters. Like, the spells that were introduced with these subclasses are stupid good, and I would actually say that if you are playing with those spells and the Chronurgy wizard, it's like S tier plus. And I gotta say, the Graviturgy spells are really sweet as well. Having played them, having used a bunch of them recently on a sorcerer, they were stupid good. But separating those spells from the subclass, I think, is really important to see what the subclass actually offers, particularly as we get into the Graviturgy wizard, which is about manipulating space and not time. And the first element of space that this class is going to adjust is density.
So at second level, you're gaining Adjust Density. You can select an object or creature within 30 feet of you, and that object or creature either increases or decreases in density. If you increase its density, it is now twice the weight that it was before. It moves slower, but it has advantage on strength checks and abilities. If you decrease the density, it is now lighter and can move faster, but it now has disadvantage on strength-based attack rolls and ability checks.
The target of this ability does not need to be willing. There's no saving throw to avoid it. And it is super unclear how this power works when you use it on an object that someone is wearing or carrying. It requires your concentration, though, while it's in effect. But this ability... Obviously, the first thing I think of is what happens if I make someone's armor weigh twice as much? What happens if I make someone's weapon weigh twice as much? Does that affect their ability to make attack rolls? Can I just make my enemy light and give them disadvantage on strength attacks with no saving throw or any way of stopping that? Because that's pretty cool.
It is cool, and what's really hard here is this ability doesn't account for what it suggests. The idea of changing the density of something has a lot of creative implications that are not detailed in the description of this ability. If there is a character swimming after me and I increase their density, my theory is that they would then sink, but it actually increases their strength ability checks and saving throws. So by increasing their density, I've made them better swimmers. If I have a armor-clad enemy and I make them weaker, can they still function in that heavy armor carrying that two-handed weapon? These are the sorts of things that aren't accounted for. And also, it's a second-level ability. So generally speaking, second-level abilities, when there's an option that makes them much, much more powerful, chances are you actually want to limit them to exactly what it says on the page. Which means that this ability doesn't really do what I want it to do. And it's kind of not worded in a way that identifies it as all the things that I imagine it should do.
Yeah, the conservative dungeon master in me says that even if you use this in a creative way on an object that is being worn and carried, the parameters of the ability, because it has no limits to the number of times you can use it, mean that you can reduce a creature's speed or increase their speed by 10 feet and give them disadvantage or advantage on strength, ability checks, and attack rolls. So it's just weird because if you use it on someone's armor, like what is it? Are you going to reduce their speed and give them disadvantage?
As a DM, I want to let that happen, but also there's the other side of that you're now kind of giving that player an ability that's way too powerful and endlessly useful.
It is really powerful, it is really useful, but it does require your concentration. And disadvantage on strength-based attack rolls is good. It's not always worth concentrating on, especially past second level.
At 6th level, you gain Gravity Well. If you hit a creature with a spell, you can now move them 5 feet to an unoccupied space, as long as they either fail the saving throw or the spell hits.
This also works if you cast a spell on a willing target. So basically, you can kind of bounce the targets of your fireballs around in interesting ways, or your cantrips. I've had a lot of fun with the telekinetic feat on my spellcasters, and this kind of adds even more to that. This is a cool ability. It's unique too. I wish it occurred in more places because I like the idea of spells moving people around.
I have been surprised at how useful a 5-foot movement can be, but it can be so useful.
At level 10, you gain the power of Violent Attraction. As a reaction, when a creature within 60 feet of you hits with a weapon attack, you can spend your reaction and one use of this ability, which can be used a number of times per day equal to your intelligence modifier, to add an extra d10 damage to that hit.
Also, if a creature is falling, you can use it as a reaction on them to increase the fall damage by 2d10.
So keep in mind that this is a d10 extra damage, and it's used a number of times per day equal to your intelligence modifier. The average of a d10 roll is 5.5. So if you use this ability the full number of times you can use it, you're getting an extra 25 points of damage out of it over the course of a single adventuring day.
Either that or you better really be hoping a lot of people are falling, and even then you're doubling that 50 extra damage, which is a slight improvement. At 14th level, you gain Event Horizon. As an action on your turn, you can create a localized field of gravity that pulls creatures down towards the ground. When hostile creatures start their turn within this area, they make a strength saving throw, and if they fail, their speed is reduced to 0. It's sort of like a localized Ivard's Black Tentacles that you can spring up out of the ground, except in this case, it's pulling them down to the ground.
Yeah, and they also take 2d10 force damage on a failed save, and even if they succeed the save, the area of the spell is difficult ground for them. It's not technically difficult ground, it just costs them extra movement to move around it. So it gives you this kind of force bubble around you that slows everybody down in your area. It is, as Kelly said, functionally speaking, the effect is not dissimilar to a spell like Ivard's Black Tentacles, which would grab creatures and hold them and deal bludgeoning damage to them. And you do have to concentrate on this ability too. So this is a ability that you get at level 14 that is about as powerful as a 4th level spell, or you can expend a 3rd level spell slot or higher to use it again.
So when we think about the Graviturgy Wizard, again, there's some really cool options here, but my main beef with the Graviturgy Wizard is that more than one ability requires concentration. And this immediately means that these abilities need to be better than the concentration spells that you have at your disposal. Otherwise, they become niche or borderline not necessary. Concentration is something that you can only have one thing that you're concentrating on. So if there's an ability that takes up your concentration, you're now limited. You can't bust out any of those amazing spells. That's a really big hindrance for me. And when we compare this to the other subclasses, a lot of these abilities are neat. They feel on theme, on brand for the Graviturgy Wizard. This whole thing radiates with the Graviturgy energy. But I also just don't think it delivers anything extremely valuable here that I would look at over another subclass option. It's not my least favorite. I still think there's one or two others that I would put lower than this one, which makes me want to give this a C ranking. I feel like everything in the B, A, and S tier are definitely the wizard subclasses I would pick first. I think it's cool, and if somebody wanted to play one, I wouldn't say they're making a bad choice if it feels on the theme that they want to play, but I wouldn't pick it.
I was going to give this a B, but I agree with you now. I really like the level 6 feature of pushing people around 5 feet.
Yes.
And I do think the 2nd level feature has some potentially game-breaking interpretations.
But that's the hard part, is we need to decide what the interpretation is. And if we lean on the you can only do what is written on the page, we can't take into account DM's rulings on various interpretations of situations. Unfortunately, the 2nd level ability is open to an extremely wide range of interpretation. But if we limit it to what's on the page and what it says it can do, it's a pretty good ability.
Yeah, like there's a lot of ways that we could imagine using this to interact with the environment to do crazy things. But functionally speaking, all of those are going to require a generous ruling from a dungeon master who has to then interpret the rules. Like any sort of thing where it's like, I'm going to make this object that's over a creature's head weigh twice as much and drop it on them. Cool, situational, not necessarily reproducible in every combat encounter. And I think that one other argument says, well, these are cool powers that don't cost spell slots that you can use instead of casting a spell and thus conserve your spell slots. The thing is that concentrating on a spell is the best thing your wizard can do. And when you're not concentrating on a really good spell, you are not playing your wizard optimally. Really, like you gotta lay down in combat situations. You gotta lay down one of the really good concentration spells. And sometimes with many wizards, and many times that I played a wizard, putting down a high level concentration spell is the only spell I need to cast because they're so good. So if you're thinking, oh, well, I'm going to cast one of these abilities and now throw some fireballs and cast some cantrips and conserve my spell slots. No, it doesn't really work out that way. And overall, saving a spell slot is not as good as taking a better subclass to begin with that augmented your spells. I love the level 6 feature, though, with this. I still love the level 6 feature, and I want to like it. The level 10 feature is garbage. It's a pitiful amount of extra damage over the course of the day, and it uses your reaction to do it. And the level 14 feature is a kind of localized Evard's Black Tentacles, as we said, which is just... It just doesn't feel good enough to be a level 14 feature.
I would rather cast Evard's Black Tentacles.
Yeah, I would too. Yeah. So it's like one of those subclasses that like starts out interesting. It's like, oh, this is cool. This the level 2 feature. It's cool. I don't know how to interpret this. The level 6 feature is like, wow, I really like that. And then it just kind of,
yeah,
it takes a nosedive as you get into higher levels. I think it'd be a lot of fun to play this character level 6.
In a low-end campaign.
Yeah, but beyond that, I think it's definitely a C.
So up on the screen right now, you're going to see our rankings for all of the wizard subclasses so far. Let's take a look at what our community thought of these three.
So, our community gave the War Magic Wizard 12.6 for S tier, 32.7% for A tier, 33.9 for B tier, and 15.5 for C tier, with a pretty sizable slice, 5% or so, giving it a D ranking. So, people like the School of War Magic. There's a very strong positive response here, but also just as much of a tilt towards the B and the side of it. So I think it kind of solidly rests as a B.
Yeah, the B is the winning number here, and there is a large amount of C, but there is definitely a large amount of A. I originally gave the War Magic a B tier, and I think the community agrees with me on this, but there are both arguments for C or A tier here that are valid. For Chronurgy, we're looking at a 30.7 for S tier, with 27.8 for A tier, 31.3 for B tier, 8.1 for C, and just a very small sliver for D. What's really interesting here is it actually gets more B tier than it does S tier, but is also one of the highest S tier rankings. Surprisingly, it gets more S and B than it does A.
I don't know what to do with this ranking, because technically the B wins out, but it's very clearly weighted towards the S and A.
Is there a wizard subclass that gets more S tier rankings?
Only the Divination Wizard.
Yeah.
So I think in light of that fact, I'm going to make the executive decision and put this at the A ranking from the community, but with a notable slant that there was a B response. Those of you that rated this a B should take a second look at this subclass, I think. Graviturgy, on the other hand, also under similar circumstances, gets a 7.7 for S tier, 29% for A, 42.1% for B, and 17.7 for C, with a good sliver for the D tier ranking. So here it's very solidly in the B tier ranking with a pretty sizable A response. I think as well, you know, the size of the B ranking here perhaps just might be a lot of people were unsure about this. And looking through the comments in our poll, I see a lot of people actually saying, I didn't know how to rank these ones because they had just come out when we did the poll.
Looking at that, though, it is also a valid argument to say that your initial gut instinct to give it a B might have had some weight. So we thought that it was a little bit lower on the scale, but it is good to see that a lot of people are pushing these to slightly higher rankings than maybe we thought. So finally, up on screen right now, you're going to see the rankings we have given to all the wizard subclasses, and next to that, you're going to see all of the community rankings. There's a little bit of a mixed bag here, but it is interesting that I think a lot of the wizard subclasses are just generally good. And as we've said before, wizards are made more by their spell selection than they are by their subclass. So at the end of the day, playing the wizard subclass that speaks the most to you is not really a problem. There are some that have some stronger options than others.
Yeah, there's several wizard subclasses pair beautifully with some of the best spells available to wizards. And so the combination of those two things kind of kicks the power of the class up into overdrive. But even if you're choosing really strong spells, but one of the less strong subclasses, or vice versa, one of the stronger subclasses with a less good spell selection, you might hit more of the middle of the road. It's really welding those two things together where you really get into the full power of what a wizard is capable of.
So this has been part 3 of our tier rankings for the wizard subclasses in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Tell us about which subclasses you love the most in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our absolutely amazing Patreon supporters. From the bottom of our hearts, a big thank you to all of you on Patreon for your ongoing support of this channel. If you enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube, please consider joining our community by following the links in the description below.
And don't forget that Dungeons of Drakkenheim is coming to Kickstarter. We've partnered with Ghostfire Games to bring this campaign to life as a 5th edition module. You can go to DRAKKENHEIM.com or check the links below to join our mailing list and be up to date on all new information regarding the Kickstarter. Also, don't forget to check out our live play in the Worlds of Drakkenheim, which airs Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we've got plenty more videos where we rank the subclasses in D&D 5e right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time
in the dungeon.